at Leavenberg, at Temple Sinai in Atlanta, Georgia. Read from Psalm 121, Psalm for Ascents. I turn my eyes to the mountains, from where will my help come? My help comes from Adonai, maker of heaven and earth. God will not let your foot give way, your guardian will not slumber. See, the guardian of Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. Adonai is your guardian, Adonai is your protection at your right hand. By day the sun will not strike you, nor the moon by night. Adonai will guard you from all harm. God will guard your life. Adonai will guard your going and your coming, now and forever. And the child asks, tell me of life. And the sage answered, life, my child, is a mystery. We do not ask to be born, nor do we even understand the meaning of birth, of creation. We grow and we experience life's pleasures and pains. We love, and slowly, oh so slowly, we come to realize that we have become, that we are. At that moment, we humble ourselves before the mystery of life and quietly say, though I knew it not, I have been granted the most precious gift of all, the gift of life. And the child asked, tell me of death. And the sage answered, death, my child, is a mystery. It is the inevitable return of the gift of life, the gift which came free to us. We live as the trustee of that mysterious being, of that unexplainable becoming. Yes, you and I are but the trustees of life. We nurture it, we delight in it, we give of it to others, and at the appointed time we sadly, yet with pride, return it from whence it came. The beauty, my child, is that what we are, what we have become, remains long after the gift has been returned. It remains as a precious keepsake with our loved ones who live on. We gather today in solemn remembrance, and many of us in celebration of the significance of the life of Al Lang. We join our hearts together to give comfort and strength to his family. We recognize that mourning is a time filled with many emotions and memories, both the bitter and the sweet. We began the service today with the recitation of Psalm 121, and we'll continue with the recitation of psalms and prayers, thus linking Al's life with the millennial-old tradition of the people of Israel and the eternity of God. It's these words of Psalm 23. Adonai roi l'etzel, ino tesheya hitzeni, amei meluchot, yenachaleini, nafshi yeshovev, yancheni v'maglei tzedek, yancheni v'maglei tzedek, למען שמו. גם כי אלה בגד שמה ולא יירא רע, כי אתה עמדי. שבתך ומשענתך המה ירחמוני. תערוך לפני, שולחן נגד צהרי. דשנת והשמן ראשי כוסי רוויה. הטוב והחסד ירדפוני כל ימי חיי, כל ימי חיי. ושבתי בבית אדוני לאורך ימים. אדוני אלוהי לא אעצור. Adonai is my shepherd, I shall not want. God makes me lie down in green pastures, leads me beside still waters, and restores my soul. God, you lead me in right paths for the sake of your name. Even when I walk in the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You have set a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You have anointed my head with oil, my cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life. I shall dwell in the house of God forever. There are some psalms that simply cannot be recited at a lot of funerals. The reality is that even though any psalm is appropriate to recite at any funeral, Psalm 15 is one that we just don't have very often the opportunity to recite. The reason is because Psalm 15 is really reserved for those who have a particular character, a kindness, a way in the world, and unfortunately it is a way that is so rarely present here in this country and in this century. And yet we have an opportunity to recite this for Al, recognizing, as you will hear in these words, it is as if they were written deliberately for him, though written many millennia before he ever breathed his first breath. Adonai, who may abide in your house, who may dwell in your holy mountain? Those who are upright, who do justly, who speak the truth within their hearts, who do not slander others, nor wrong them, nor bring shame upon them, who scorn the lawless, but honor those who revere God, who give their word, and come what may, do not retract, who do not exploit others, who do not take bribes. Those who live in this way shall never be shaken. We learn from Kohelet, from Ecclesiastes, that there is indeed a time for everything, a time for every purpose under heaven, a time for being born and a time for dying, a time for planting and a time for uprooting the planted, a time for weeping and a time for laughing, a time for wailing and a time for dancing, a time for seeking and a time for losing, a time for tearing and a time for sowing, a time for silence and a time to speak. And it's at this point that we pause from the timelessness of Jewish tradition and instead turn to the liturgy of lived lives. I'm going to invite a few people who have already been identified to be able to come forward and share their own reminiscence and reflections, the memories that at one point were perhaps a little more banal or trivial, now today become sacred possessions. We're going to invite you to step forward first.
My grandchildren requested me, said to me, "Buddy, are you going to speak?" And I was very shocked, and I said, "You have to speak." Okay. Now, I received an email from my closest cousin's daughter that said that she was surprised to hear Al died. She said that he just kept beating the odds over and over. How could we not just hope for one more time? And that, in a way, defines our lifetime of together. He hated commuting on the Long Island Railroad from Colbert to the city, and I hated having to go to the Lakefront Comfortable station because he always left and passed the Colony station. On a whim, we announced that we were moving to Florida. When people asked him what he was going to do, he found the correct answer after taking his children to Disney on our way to Florida. He told the people he had the job as Big Al in Disney. He always found humor in every situation, even in his moments when he managed to wink goodbye after being pronounced dead. I kid you not. We arrived in Plantation on July 4th, 1973, soon to be followed by my parents, aunts and uncles, and most of Al's family. We started again. We found a new home at Temple Beth Israel, where we made friends who are still very much part of our lives. Whenever we found a roadblock, and I would get hysterical and say, "What are we going to do?" He would say, "We will work something out," and we usually did. And we always did it together. Our children thrived, got married, and then grandchildren came. We had but we had those were the pleasures, but then we had hardships to face, which we never got over, the loss of our youngest son. And thanks to the fantastic friends, my new sons-in-laws, we're still able to have Gary part of our lives. I lost my place, but Al and I have survived that. And even though I'm petrified, Al taught me that because we are surrounded by love of our family and wonderful friends, there will be a tomorrow, a bright one. I want to thank all of you. I'm very emotionally and overcome by all of you who have made the trip from up north and from Western and Plantation. You are my life, and my house life also. And I want to thank all of you for being here, and I hope you will join us afterwards at our home.
Now I'll be able to hear from three of Al's grandchildren. I'm going to invite Jacob and Julianne and Ben.
I want to preface this by saying both my siblings are actors, so please deal with my issues with public speaking. But these past few weeks, I've had a lot of opportunities to look through old photo albums from my childhood, from my dad's childhood, and of course I was looking for some nice photos of Papa and things along those lines. And what was always obvious in the photos was how present Papa was, and that is in all sense of the word. Of course he was in the photos, but in the photos with me and my brother and my sister, he was always doing something with us. There's this photo that I've seen for years where it's me and my brother who, for whatever reason, are wearing shirts in front of a TV playing on our GameCube, and there Papa was, right next to us, also somehow trying to figure out how to play the game that Jacob and I had played for years. Or, my brother says he detached shirt. Or there's a picture of my sister and him playing Chutes and Ladders with my sister sprawled on the floor and Papa right next to her. And for me, that just kind of sums up how present Papa was in our life and what I want to take from him, and that he was always there in every sense of the word. And beyond photos, I have memories of him coming to all of my baseball games, and even as he got older and struggled a little bit more physically, making the trek from the car, from some pretty uneven grass and uneven sidewalks, just to watch me pitch and be there as he got older and as I got older. He was always present, engaged, and supportive, and truly showed what family meant. And even in this past week, when he had a little bit less lucidity, and we were able to still have some short, poignant conversations that were not long, but were still there, I was able to sit next to him as my dad and I would this past week and the rest of the family, and try to help him with whatever he was asking and just make sure that he knew how much we loved him. But for me, it was also very important that he knew that we knew that he loved us and that I was there. And so I'd always try to tell this to him. And in one of my last conversations with this, as I was saying that we love you and we know that you love us, he just turned to me and was able to say, always. And he was always there, always present, and that's just what I'll always remember him as and take from him.
So it became very clear to me at a young age that as the granddaughter to Al and Ida Lang, that I had better pick up the phone and call my grandparents once in a while. And I did just that over the years. I had called many times, and they'd always go something like this. I would call, Bubby would answer, she'd say, Papa, get on the line, he would listen on the phone, and Bubby would tell me about their last visit with Zyler, or the roof at the clubhouse, and the update on that. And Papa would listen along, and then towards the end of the call, I'd say, well, Papa, how are you? And he'd always say, without fail, I'm still here. And that was the deal. Anytime we're on the phone, he would say, I'm still here. And when we saw him, sorry, he was always so positive and so simple. I'm still here. Now, for me, and what I imagine is true for a lot of people, I tend to overthink and overcomplicate and overlook the positive. Those patterns are very easy to fall into, so I don't know how he did it, but he made it so easy to just find joy in living. And it was never hard for him. It was just always, I'm still here. And so though, of course, I cherish the memories of his support and his presence through my childhood, especially our shared love of musicals and song, what I'm moving forward holding on to is how he was able to stay grounded in his gratitude for life and for living. And so may his memory be a reminder that each day is truly a blessing. And as I return to my day today, I will take his words as a reminder that things are going to be okay, because I'm still here.
Well, I don't know how I'm going to follow that. My little notebook. I'm Jacob. I've met many of you. Some of you have met me when I was like little. Al's oldest grandson, I like to think favorite, though apparently that's up for debate. Thank you all for being here today. We're talking a lot about my grandfather, Al Lang, Papa, as we call him, obviously. How he made us feel the impact on our lives, sharing special memories. And I just wanted to speak about a couple of the things about him that kind of made him special to me, as opposed to kind of sharing specific memories. I have a little bit of that in there, but really like why he was special, and excuse me, how he made me feel and how he made all of us feel, I like to think, when we were around him, and how he just radiated like this joy for life. He was always so happy to be where he was, kind of as Julian said, so grounded, as Ben said, so present. I like how we're all kind of speaking on this theme, and that kind of, uplifts you and makes you feel stronger. I think that it's always exploding out of him with his sense of humor, and also his love of music that he, shared with all of us. We all know how happy he was, right? We were around him. He built this wonderful life out of what he had built, what he started from. It pervaded everything around him. You're around him, you feel lifted up. He lifted people up through his natural kindness and his jokes, which, in my experience, they weren't like dirty jokes either. They were fun, like bright jokes, right? I mean, he had cat on the roof, pea soup that were a little blue sometimes, but I think they spoke to his kind of sense of humor and his life experience in a way that he was happy, and he wanted people to be happy around him as well. I love musical theater, I love music, but honestly probably not quite as much as Al Lang did, and we shared a lot of that together. I have so many memories of me in the back of his car. It was an Acura at one point. It was something else before then, maybe a Lexus. Sitting in the back of his car with him teaching me classics like Annie Get Your Gun or Singing in the Rain, maybe the less classic Paint Your Wagon, so let's focus on Annie Get Your Gun and Singing in the Rain. Singing along with me in the back of the car, teaching me these musics like Moses Supposes or many of the songs, Show Business Like Show Business, from Annie Get Your Gun. Maybe it's a little bit of cliche, but as I was kind of putting my thoughts together, thinking about what I wanted to say, I brought these up because these are the lessons that I want to take with me. I want to be able to go through life and be someone who, whenever I'm in the room, I want people to feel comfortable and safe and uplifted by me. I want to be able to radiate the joy like Al Lang did. And I want to find ways to share the things that I love with people and share those passions generously so that people can feel like they're part of them. And it's not something that's just being told to them. And that way I can live a life that would make him proud. Thank you, Papa.
to invite Gail to come forward at this time.
I'm Al's niece. My mother was Al's older sister. She was 9 when he was born. They had an older brother, Jack, who was 18. My mother told me that her mother gave Al to her and said, "He's your baby." She was thrilled. And 9 years old. She told me things were difficult for her parents after the Great Depression. She kept hearing that her father lost all his money on Wall Street, and she told me that she literally wanted to go there and look for it. Her parents argued frequently, and she said she would take Al out at night for walks to get away from their arguments. I asked Al if he remembered wandering the streets of the Bronx as a child with another child. He said, "What did I know? I was a kid." When my mother was 16 and Al was 7, their father died. 2 years later, their mother died. Jack was married and on his own. My mother and Al were shuttled around a bit, living with their aunt and other family. When my parents got married and I was a baby, Al came to live with us. I guess this is why I've always felt exceptionally close to my uncle. I mean, there's his intelligence, his empathy, his humor. Who won't miss his humor? Throughout her life, one of my mother's greatest joys was her brother Alfred. Once when she was in the hospital and sad and lonely, he called her and her whole demeanor changed. She loved Ida too, because as she told me, Ida made her brother happy. My mother told me that when Al lived with us, I was out of my playpen in the back of our building with Al keeping me company. I got all excited and pointed to an animal running by and said, "Doggy!" 9.5 months old. My first words, it was a rat. My mother told me that I thought every family had a mommy, a daddy, and an Alfred. Every family should be so lucky.
We'll invite Eric to share some thoughts as well.
Short. Okay. I teach brevity in speaking and practice brevity in speaking. Try to say if the judge gives me a 10-minute time limit to shoot before. And as I think about that, I can say that my father was first generation American, born to immigrants, was orphaned at 9, and built a life allowing him to die surrounded by his children and grandchildren, looking out at a lake and trees from his beautiful home. And that's half of us do that well in life, where everyone can say nothing but good things about us. Half of us do that well, we would be happy. And I could stop there. And with what my children and my mother and my cousin said, that would pretty much do it. But you're not getting out of here early. not because I feel the need to say more for myself, but because it wouldn't do him justice. And in a lot of ways, he wouldn't want me to say so little. This was someone, and I'm including my mother in this, who for some reason liked to hear me speak. One fascinating memory I have in that regard is my first court appearance in South Florida. Normally I practice not in South Florida, it was in federal court in Miami, and they drove down the day that I was going to cross-examine a witness, and they were so proud and so happy. And I know that when I speak and it's on video, they will be the first to text me 5 minutes into the speech telling me that they can't get the video. Nonetheless, he had the perfect ending. His very last, before his last day, he was lucid until 2 or 3 days at the end. But his mantra was, help me, but not help me. Help me, please. Please help me. Never just the command, always the polite word. And I would often say, I'm here. Is that the help you want? Yes. Okay. One time he said no. And I said, what do you need? He said, I'm fighting. What are you fighting? I'm fighting my brain. What do you mean? My brain is telling me it's time to die, but I'm not ready to die yet. I'm going to stay alive as long as I can. If you had the life he had, and the happiness he had, and that he gave to others, you would want to milk it for every possible last second. In many ways, it's the story of rebuilding, the story of perseverance. Gail covered what I would consider to be part one, orphaned and growing back into family. I throw one anecdote in there. It has to do with basketball. City College of New York, CCNY, was a powerhouse nationally in basketball in the early 1950s. And he played for CCNY. Early in the 1950s, the powerful CCNY team was stripped of its titles because of a horrible point-shaving scandal. He was one of the guys they grabbed out of class to play after all those guys were kicked out. But nonetheless, my dad played NCAA college hoops, and that's not something a lot of people know about him. He joined the Army, and by which I mean before the Vietnam War, he signed up for the reserves. A fine thing to do. And he was in the Army for 5 years as part of the American Dream. And during that time, and I don't need to get into it because my mother spoke so beautifully about the two of them, he met and married my mother. There is additional part to that that is part of the picture of my father's life. It was at that time that he really learned how to be a child to parents. My grandmother and grandfather were not the in-laws. They were, in many ways, parents he knew for his entire life. He called them mom and dad. He was there for them. They were there for him. And that is a wonderful silver lining to being orphaned, finding this extra new relationship after getting married. The most important thing in his life happened 3 years after they were married, coincidentally the year that Dad was born. I'm going to fast forward a little. After I was born, we moved from Queens to a house in Long Island, and Gary was born. And that allows me to talk about memories of Dad as a father, not as a child, not as a spouse, not as a son-in-law, but as my father. And I could talk but won't for hours on that, but his philosophy as a father, and he told me this, I'm not making this up or inferring it, was to do everything and let me choose while I wanted to choose. And so I have early memories of going to high school football games and basketball games, and yes, even a demolition derby, for those that remember such fun things. And a lot of baseball. He took me to my first baseball game at age 7. White Sox beat the Yankees in old Yankee Stadium, 5-0. What's fascinating about that is in those last few weeks of lucidity, they tell you you're supposed to talk about old memories. Dad, do you remember this? No. Do you remember this? No. Do you remember taking me to Yankee Stadium? Yes. It's those things that stick. Now, when you're young, your dad is the strongest person in the world and can build anything and can do anything. And my dad was a big man, so that wasn't false, but he built things, not with his hands and anything like that, but the house we had in Long Island, we planted a long row of hemlock bushes along the street. Went back there a year ago, the hemlocks are still there. The house we had in Plantation, at this point I was actually big enough to be part of the building as opposed to being 6 years old and perceive that I was part of the building. We planted a long row of palm trees that are now, you guys know the ones, 40, 50 feet in the air, and they're still there. And so he's left his mark in a physical sense on the world. One other thing in this regard, second thing you may not know. He always wanted to write a comic book, a superhero comic book. And his character was called Birdman. And Birdman would land on electrical wires, but wouldn't get electrocuted like birds. Take that one. Second reinvention, we moved to Florida. And that completely changes. I'm getting strange looks from the kids.
We wanted more about Birdman.
You wanted more about Birdman. We'll talk about the show. The move to Florida was nothing other than a reinvention, but I don't want to focus on the business or family side because that gives me a chance to talk about Dad as a Jew. And I look out here at people who I've seen 50 years ago in synagogue, whose children I grew up with. He was president of the synagogue. He was a respected member of his community. But before having to sit on the bima as president, he sat next to me and we did the prayers together and I learned things together from him. And those are strong, fascinating, deep memories. Jumping ahead. He died on a Saturday. The Saturday before, we went to temple, and Brad was even the rabbi via video. And he was still cogent enough, and the memories were deep enough that he was doing the service in Hebrew. Shema, Hafta. He was just sitting there chanting it. And that's how deep the Judaism was ingrained in him. The following Saturday, again, service is on 10 o'clock in the morning. Now, he's not praying at this point in time, or at least not out loud. But when the Shema and Via Hafta came on, his body changed. He grabbed the hands that he was holding, my daughter and my mother, tighter. You can see that he was affected by these words and this melody that he has known for 80 years that was important to him inside. And I think both of those things, though, within the last week, speaks so much to his Judaism beyond the teaching and the learning and the sitting next to you in the shul. Rebuild 3. Age 50, he shifted careers from the auto rental industry to property appraisal. I'll say that again. Age 50, he shifted careers from one totally unrelated thing to the other. That's just amazing. Absolutely, positively amazing. Now, there's no other way to say it. It is in that context that I'm going to do someone else's job, because there's someone who's not here, and that's Gary. Gary's not here to talk about my father. Gary's not here. That is the part of my life that Gary had with my father that I didn't, because by that time, it was at college, it was at law school, I moved to Atlanta, but Gary was still in South Florida and working with my dad in the appraisal business. And they had a day-to-day relationship as grown-ups that I did not necessarily have. And he would talk about both the joys and frustrations of working with one's father in a business sense, but was always there and always a wonderful presence to Gary, who my father always looked out for and always concerned and cared for on a moving forward, how can I help him kind of basis, which was wonderful. He then retired, or slowly went into retirement. And when you come back to the house for Shiva and you go to the main room where the TV is, I counted this morning just so I can say this, there are at least 12 photographs that he took of sunsets around the world, waterfalls around the world, that symbolized the various places, both in this hemisphere and in Europe, that my mother and father went to in this portion of their lives, which was something that, again, if we focus on that whole American dream thing, again, orphan, son of immigrants, to traveling the world, it is just a wonderful thing. Then there was rebuilding work. He raised me, he raised Gary, he saw his grandchildren grow, and then all of a sudden he's got Zyler and Charlotte, Rob and Don, in his life new at age 80, age 82. Think about that. It's a sea change right on the heels of losing your son, which is a gut punch. And at that age, I was worried about both my parents for that first year or so, because that's a heck of a blow to absorb. But the love from our new family members, Rob and Don and Charlotte and Zyler, absolutely one of the things that kept him going. Where do we go? Humor, something everyone talked about, but can't be stressed enough. 3 or 4 months before, when we knew we were sort of looking at within the dementia had begun to kick in, called them, as I always do when I'm in the car on the way from point A to point B. This particular drive, point A was the house, point B was the barber, and said, "Where are you going?" I said, "I'm going to get a haircut." To which he responded, "Not all of them." Just as you know, completely reflexively. Those were his jokes. He was the grandfather of dad's jokes, as you might say. At 2:30 today, we're all going to the dentist. 2:30, never mind. The last week of his life, this was probably the Monday before the Saturday, sitting around the room, talking about things with the aides, and something came up that we have a lot of August birthdays in our family. And I cracked that, well, we have busy Novembers too. And everyone looked at me kind of funny, and about 3 or 4 seconds later, I got that. That's funny. And so if you don't get it, know that you are not as quick as an on morphine man with dementia. Just don't feel bad, but that would be the issue. He was kind to the end. Not help me, but help me please. I was laying with him one day, I sat down next to him, I held his hand. He didn't have a lot of talking left, but he picked up my hand, kissed it. Kind to the end. He was a forward-looking, optimistic, persevering man, the love of life, even to the end. And now I will say it. No one ever had a bad thing to say about him, just no one. And if any of us could do half as well, it's a life well lived. Thank you. You're my friend.
Atem Nitzavim Hayom Kolchem begins our Torah portion for this week. You stand together, all of you, on this day. Bifnei Adonai Elohechem, before Adonai, your God. Rashechem, Shiftechem, Ziknechem, V'shotrechem, your tribal heads, your elders, and your officials. Kol Ish Yisrael, every person among the Israelites. These were the words revealed by Moses in which he reminds this next generation of Israelites that they are in covenant with God. Now, at the end of his life, Moses stands before the Israelites, all of whom were standing on the edge of the Jordan River about to cross and take possession of the land promised to their ancestors 400 years before they were even born. Rather than divide the people into tribes, Moses assembles them all together. Rather than craft a separate message for the leaders, Moses speaks to all of the people together. Rather than assemble people of means alone, Moses forgoes all of those artificial divides and speaks with one voice to the text describes. Children, wives, the stranger within the camp, both the wood chopper and the water drawer. Moses didn't treat people differently simply because they had resource that he desired. Attendants Avim Hayom Kulchem. You stand together, all of you, on this day. Those who have difficulty imagining the authenticity of the story, the accuracy that a person of power could rise above petty distinctions of class. The person could show equal love to all whom he encountered. Do so because it seems unimaginable today. And they doubt the veracity of the story because they have never seen it exemplified in their lifetime. Essentially, they are the people who never met Al Lang. We're here today in this place where lives are examined and where people are remembered for a few reasons. First, we're here to provide love and support to Al's family, to Ida, to Eric, to Anne-Marie. We're here to tell Al's grandchildren, Jacob and Julianne, Ben and Zyler, that the way they experience their Papa is real and true and is the way that we will all remember him. We're here to assure Zyler's fathers, Don and Rob, and his sister Charlotte, his niece Gail, and really each of his cousins and nieces and nephews, that the gentle and kind person they are mourning is being mourned by each of us as well. We're here because we need to comfort and be comforted. Because even though we can find relief in knowing that Al is no longer experiencing the decline of his health, we miss him. And we find it a bit difficult to imagine a world without the radiance of his smile. They say that the truest testament of a life well lived is the story that it has left behind. We're challenged to tell it and to tell it well. Thank you to Ida, to Gail, to Jacob, Julianne, and Ben, and to Eric for telling his story and for telling it so well. Your words emerge from the sincerity of your relationships and the love in your hearts. I'll share only a few other recollections, in part to explore anew some parts of Al's life that have not yet been shared, and in part to retell some of the details that have already been heard in an attempt to link those stories as well as the sacredness of our tradition. Attendants Avim Hayom Kulchem, you stand together, all of you on this day, all of you. But before he could stand, he had to learn how to lift himself up. And Al learned to lift himself up at an early age. As we have heard, he was born in the Bronx as the youngest of 3 kids, whose sister was 8 or so years older than him, and whose brother was 8 or 9 years older than her. Al's time with his parents was cut short when they died before he turned 10 years old. Al was raised by his siblings, first a little bit by his brother Jack, and then by his sister. The siblings did their best to care for Al, and they worked diligently to enable him to have the tools to not only function but to thrive on his own. Funds were tight, and when Al was ready for college, he attended City College, in part because it was free, and in part because it was local, and in part because Al was able to get a great education. As Eric had shared, while there he played basketball, which to those of us who knew him must come as a bit of a surprise, for Al was not known as a particularly tall person, and basketball is often a game where aggressive behavior is valued, and Al didn't have an aggressive bone in his body. When he learned in 1958 that his draft number was going to be called, rather than waiting for that reality and going overseas to likely an armed conflict, Al made his own reality. He enlisted in the Army Reserves. He served from 1958 until he was discharged in 1963. Those years were big for Al. But it was this 6-month period in particular that had the most impact, at least for those assembled today. Ida was visiting her brother George, and she was a part of this group of individuals that were going skiing for the day at Concord, and it was in her parents' living room that she met this 28-year-old handsome man named Al Wang. He was part of this friend group, and who was there in her parents' living room, and it was there that her life changed remarkably. The two began seeing each other, and 6 months after they met, in 1962, Ida and Al got married. Ida mentioned to me that she loved those early dates and those early visits that they would have together, and she was most attracted to his kindness and his rather clever sense of humor. Perhaps it was an homage to the chance meeting, but Ida and Al continued skiing for years after. Al worked as a purchasing agent for auto leasing companies, which was not his dream job, but it did allow him to drive home in a different car every night to his dream girl. It was Al's brother Jack who eventually lured Al away from one of these hugest dealerships in New York to go to work for him, manufacturing tools to use in sales presentations, specifically the folders and kits which contained samples of the product being sold. Al was not particularly inspired by this opportunity, and he began to get restless. He and Ida became parents when Eric was born, and then not long afterward moved from Queens to Long Island. It was in that Long Island house that their family was completed with Gary's birth in 1970. It turns out that Long Island was just a layover in the Lang story. As just a few years later, the family joined others in the time-honored Jewish tradition of moving to someplace warmer. They moved from New York to Florida. Upon sharing the news that they would be making this trek, both of Al's siblings shared that they too were planning such a move. And soon they created a new shtetl of their own and their new environment. Those years were marked by family togetherness, with kids growing up together, celebrating holidays together, and forming bonds that are still evident and celebrated today. In Florida, Al returned to the auto industry for a time, striking out on his own before taking a management position which enabled him to go back to school to get into real estate. He thought he would become a realtor, but when he learned about the position and duties associated with being an appraiser, he knew that he had found his next gig. His schooling complete, Al hung his shingle and made a very successful living as an appraiser. Though his greatest success and his greatest pride was that he was able to bring Gary into the business. And that position allowed him to dive even deeper into one of his passions, Judaism and synagogue life. Many congregations develop a queue for leadership, enabling new members to get involved slowly and to whet their appetite by sinking their teeth into committee work, then getting on the board, and then taking a few years off before becoming an officer, and then only a few stay involved long enough to engender themselves and their leadership style with their fellow congregants enough that they're elected president. Al Wang was elected president of his Fort Lauderdale conservative congregation in 1978, and he held that position for 4 years, just a few years after stepping foot in the synagogue for the first time. That he became president should surprise none of us. Al and Ida are charming and fun to be around, and their life revolved around the synagogue. It was there that they found their friends, their social group, and as I shared, Al had a great sense of humor and a kindness about him that endeared him to others. His presidency coincided with some of the big decisions made in the conservative movement, specifically related to the ordination of women, the rise of the Habarah movement, a commitment to the state of Israel, and a flurry of publications, which set the course for conservative Judaism for decades. No doubt these topics, each of them rather divisive, found their way into the Fort Lauderdale community. And no doubt Al was able to keep everyone together due to the glue of his kindness and his punny jokes. Al and Ida very much enjoyed life in Florida. Over the years, they attended more bar and bat mitzvah services than they can count. They loved establishing the tradition of Sunday night, pizza night, and they really loved going to baseball games. They socialized as a family much of the time, hosting parties in the backyard, the pool. As Ida shared, the unofficial philosophy that guided Al and Ida was as follows: being with your children is more important than climbing the highest mountain. Once Gary hit his second decade, as much of it was about being together as a family, that together time sometimes became just the two of them. Starting in the 1990s, the Langs became cruisers. Ida explained to me the draw. She said, "We like fun people. We like party people." Together, they partied all over Europe, in Israel, in Central America, really anywhere where the city temperature would be cooler than Florida. But staying close to home was also a joy, because Al loved immersing in the world of Broadway musicals. In his later years, he got involved in the chorus as a singer himself, and he loved to talk about his singing. And he loved to talk about movies, especially like Singing in the Rain, where lampposts became tools to enable people to reach even higher heights, and where you can't help but smile when watching the screen. Al loved to smile. It was a smile that was on his face when he first met Ida, and his disarming and adoring smile brought people into his life for 89 years. Al and Ida had a lot of loves, but chief among them was their Judaism, and they remained a steady force at the synagogue until about 25 years ago when Eric and Anne-Marie became parents and Al and Ida became grandparents, and there's nothing more joyous for a grandparent than going to shul with your grandkids. So Al and Ida became adopted family of the Atlanta Cruz Synagogue, Temple Sinai, which I'm privileged to serve as a senior rabbi. It was during this time that Al helped Ida to write her book, to collect her speeches. And it was during this time that Al helped Ida to navigate her illness. And it was during this time that Al and Ida determined that they would not just be active grandparents. They would be the kind of grandparents who were so present in the lives of their grandkids that whenever they would see each other's faces would light up, and the joy of possibility and adventure would be before them. He played games with his grandkids, card games, board games, it didn't matter. He was known by his grandkids as a big joke guy, a big pun guy. He was, as Eric put it, in a failed attempt at humor, but a successful attempt at loving sincerity. The grandfather of dad jokes. Anne-Marie shared that Al was a wonderful father-in-law, and not just because he was a wonderful grandfather. He was loving, he was gentle, he was kind. He was known as a good listener, and he withheld judgment, preferring to take life as it came, and he made every experience memorable. As she put it, everyone loved to be with him. Which I guess is a fine place for me to enter the story. I've known Al for almost 18 years, meeting him on one of his visits to Atlanta early in my tenure at Temple Sinai. I'm sorry to say that I don't recall that initial meeting. But my years of friendship with Eric has provided many opportunities to hear stories about Al, to get a sense of his deep sincerity, and to understand where Eric got his love of Judaism, his desire to give back to the synagogue, and his drive to be an active and hands-on father. Over these last few years, Al has been a constant on our Sinai Zooms, and during the heights of COVID, when I was able to see the faces of those joining virtually, I relished making a joke that would make Al smile. And I'll share something unique and I believe interesting about Al. My go-to is not the dad joke or the pun for which Al is known, but rather the sarcastic comment. And Eric, being as involved as he is at Sinai and that he is known by everyone who attends on Shabbat morning, I made a joke at Eric's expense. Eric grinned. I believe he even had some kind of clever retort of his own. But I don't remember the comment because my eyes were fixed on Al's screen. Al had stopped smiling. I made a joke about his son and his smile faded from his face. A man who so grounded his life in humor did not appreciate when humor came at the expense of anyone. In that moment, he taught me two valuable lessons. First, that humor at another's expense is cheap and easy, and that it takes more effort and creativity to approach humor from a place of kindness. And second, that I valued Al's smile more than I realized. And you know what? For the rest of our time on Zoom, I was able to find Al's face and look to his smile. It grounded me, it inspired me, it was Shabbat to me, and I miss it so. Al was known for being fun, for being hands-on. His fingerprints are not only on the deals he made or the steps he laid, his fingerprints are on our lives and our hearts and motivating us to live lives of which he would be most proud. Ida, you had 61 years of marriage with Al, and goodness, do we wish you had more. Tyler, you had 7 years with your papa, and goodness, do we wish you had more. 15 years ago, Al got a diagnosis where he was given 5 years, and those 5 years would be marked by gradual decline in health and physical activity. My hope is that the adage that has been shared before will be equally shared once again, and again, and again. That in addition to being sad that he's no longer physically with us, we should delight and relish not only in the found and gifted 10 years, but in the 89 years that this world was deemed worthy of the reward of Al Lang. Yehi zichro baruch, may Al's memory always be recalled for blessing. Amen. Now back to words of tradition. We offer the words of El Malay Rachamim, God of mercy, God on high. It's customary at this time, if comfortable doing so, to rise. El Malay Rachamim, Shochein Bamromi, Rametzei Menucha Nechona, Tachat Kanfei Hashchina, Kedoshim Utzahorim, Yisahar Havakia, Masirim El Nishmut Al Lang, Shalach Olamo, Bal Harachamim Yastirehu, Beseter Kanfav Leolamim, Vayitzror Yitzror HaChaim, El Nishmato, Adonai Hu Nachalato, Vayanuach, V'shalom Al Mishkavo, V'nomar, Amen. God of abundant mercy, God most high, may the soul of our loved one who has gone into eternity find the gift of perfect peace in your embrace, together with the holy and the pure, whose light shines like the radiance of heaven. Compassionate God, hold Al close to you forever, so that his soul may be bound up in the bond of life eternal. May he find a home with you, and may he rest in peace. As together we say, Amen. Before turning to conclude our service with words of Kaddish Yatom, Mourner's Kaddish, I'll share that that those who have this folded piece of paper also have on the inside not only those words of Kaddish, which we'll recite in just a moment, but also you'll have information about how to continue to provide love and support for Al Stanley. The Shiva information is included there along with Shiva times, the address, so that you can have opportunities to be present with and for them even after the service here comes to a close. May the love and eternal connection of our souls give us strength as we turn to recite words hallowed by time. Sanctify in the name of God, we honor Al's memory with words of Kaddish Yatom, words of Mourner's Kaddish. Yitkadal v'yitkedash Shemei Rabbav, ve'amad yivrach yemteh v'yamlich malchuteh, v'chayechol v'yomechol v'chayei v'chol beit Yisrael, v'adal v'zman karim v'imru. Amen. Yehei Shemei Rabbav v'barach le'olam v'maya, yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitamam v'yitaseh, V'yitadar, v'yitaleh, v'yitalal, Shmei v'kushav v'richu, v'elam im kol birchatam shiratam, tushbiratam v'nechematam, damiram v'hama v'imru. Amen. Yehei shlam ha'rabba min shamayim, v'chayim aleinu v'or kol Yisrael, Oseh shalom b'mamav, u'yaseh shalom.
Aleinu v'yachol Yisrael, v'yimru. Amen.
Amen. Adonai natan Adonai l'kaf yeshem l'haggadah. With Job we have said, God, you have given, God, you have taken away. Blessed be the name of God. May Al's memory be a blessing as we mark that his essence will never leave our hearts and our souls. Lech kishilach Adonai, go your way, for God has called you. Lech Adonai yeh imach, go your way, and may God be with you. Alach lefanecha tzidkecha, kavod Adonai yasnecha. Al, may your righteousness go before you, and the glory of God receive you. Amen.
Amen.
I invite those to stay in their seats at present as we invite